You know that feeling when you're craving connection, but the other person seems to pull away the moment things get too close? Or maybe you're the one who backs off when it gets intense, because it all just feels like too much. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship that feels like a push and pull game, you're not alone. The anxious-avoidant dynamic is more common than you think, and it's one of the hardest to navigate. But can it actually work? Anxious and avoidant partners are often drawn to each other like magnets, and on the surface, that attraction can feel electric. The anxious partner thrives on connection, seeks emotional closeness, and often finds their sense of safety in reassurance. They want to feel wanted, chosen, pursued. They are hypersensitive to shifts in emotional energy and quickly pick up on distance or withdrawal. On the other hand, the avoidant partner is deeply uncomfortable with too much emotional intimacy. They value independence, space, and control over their environment, especially their emotional world. While they may crave connection too, it often feels threatening, like a risk to their autonomy or a reminder of past experiences where closeness led to pain or disappointment. So what happens when these two people meet? There's usually a strong, almost instant attraction. The anxious person sees the avoidant as calm, confident, mysterious, someone who seems emotionally grounded, even if a little hard to read. The avoidant person is drawn to the anxious partner's warmth, openness, and intensity. There's a kind of balance in the contrast, a sense that each person fills a gap the other one didn't even realize they had. For a while, it can feel like a perfect fit, but that harmony rarely lasts, because underneath that initial spark are deep opposing emotional needs that, if left unchecked, will constantly collide. The anxious partner starts to crave more closeness, more assurance, more communication. They feel safe when they're emotionally attuned to their partner, when they know where they stand, and when they feel chosen every day. But the more they ask for closeness, the more the avoidant partner starts to feel overwhelmed. They interpret that need as pressure, as clinginess, and they begin to pull back. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because they don't know how to manage that level of emotional demand. For the avoidant, distance is a coping mechanism. It's how they protect themselves from feeling engulfed, judged, or trapped. And that's where the cycle begins. The more distance the avoidant creates, the more the anxious person feels rejected. That fear of abandonment kicks in. They try harder, calling more, texting more, questioning more. They overanalyze. They start walking on eggshells. They make themselves smaller in an attempt to be more tolerable. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner becomes more detached, more irritated, more emotionally unavailable. What looked like chemistry now feels like chaos. What started as comfort now feels like conflict. This cycle is not about bad intentions. It's about mismatched emotional wiring. The anxious partner is not inherently too much, and the avoidant partner is not inherently cold or unloving. They simply speak different emotional languages. One finds safety in closeness, the other in space. And without awareness of these differences, both partners begin to feel misunderstood, unappreciated, and emotionally unsafe. The anxious person feels like they're constantly chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught. The avoidant person feels like they're constantly being pursued by someone who won't let them breathe. But here's what makes this dynamic even more complicated. There's still love there. There's still a strong pull, and both partners often care deeply. That's why these relationships are so hard to leave. The emotional highs are intense, and so are the lows. It's not just about compatibility, it's about emotional survival. The anxious partner stays because they believe if they just try harder, they'll finally feel secure. The avoidant partner stays because, despite their discomfort with closeness, they're still drawn to the connection, but they want it on their terms. This is where the danger lies. If the cycle goes unchecked, it reinforces both partners' insecurities. The anxious person starts to believe they're too needy, that they ask for too much, that they have to earn love by shrinking themselves. The avoidant person starts to believe that emotional closeness always comes with a cost, that love always means giving up freedom, control, or peace. And over time, both people become exhausted, resentful, and disconnected from who they were at the beginning. Yet, despite all this friction, they keep coming back to each other. There's a sense of unfinished business, a hope that maybe this time will be different. Maybe if they can just say the right thing, do the right thing, or find the right moment, they'll finally get it right. It's that hope that keeps them tied together, even when the relationship becomes a source of pain more than joy. They aren't necessarily staying because it's working. They're staying because it feels incomplete, because that initial spark keeps whispering the promise of what it could be, even if it never truly becomes that in reality. Without self-awareness and growth, this pairing usually ends in repeated heartbreak. The anxious-avoidant dynamic is not just difficult, it's emotionally exhausting, especially when both people remain unaware of their attachment tendencies and how those tendencies drive their behaviors. In the beginning, the relationship may seem like any other with attraction, interest, even deep conversations, but soon enough, patterns emerge. The anxious partner starts to feel a growing sense of unease when the avoidant begins pulling away, and instead of recognizing it as a pattern rooted in fear or discomfort, they personalize it. They believe they must be doing something wrong, that they're not lovable enough, that they have to fix it. So they try harder, give more, and overextend themselves to close that emotional gap. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner begins to feel overwhelmed by this increased emotional intensity. They may start to detach to maintain a sense of safety and autonomy, but without understanding that this reaction is part of a deeper fear of emotional engulfment or vulnerability, they simply react. They withdraw, become critical, shut down emotionally, or distract themselves with work, hobbies, or even other relationships. They might not even realize they're doing it. They may just feel an internal pressure to get away, to breathe, to reclaim a sense of control. And because neither partner truly understands the deeper emotional currents at play, the misunderstandings pile up. The anxious partner sees the withdrawal and feels more abandoned, which fuels their anxiety. The avoidant partner sees the increased demands and feels more suffocated. It becomes a feedback loop where each person's coping mechanism triggers the other's wounds. The anxious person may beg for closeness or over-communicate, while the avoidant may grow increasingly aloof or shut the other person out completely. It's important to understand that both attachment styles are rooted in early experiences, often shaped by how love and connection were modeled in childhood. The anxious person may have grown up with inconsistency, where love was present but unpredictable, making them hypervigilant to signs of rejection. The avoidant person may have experienced a lack of emotional attunement or felt punished for needing too much, leading them to suppress their feelings and avoid dependence on others. So when these two meet, what looks like incompatibility is really two nervous systems reacting to perceived danger in opposite ways. One by clinging, the other by escaping. If neither person develops self-awareness around these patterns, they will continue to play them out in every argument, every moment of vulnerability, every turning point in the relationship. The anxious partner might think, if I just love harder, they'll finally stay. The avoidant might think, if I just protect myself better, I won't get hurt. But both end up reinforcing the very things they're afraid of. The anxious partner feels more insecure because the avoidant is distant. The avoidant feels more pressured because the anxious partner is pursuing. Over time, what began as chemistry becomes confusion, and what started as desire becomes a constant state of emotional negotiation. Without growth, these relationships tend to repeat themselves, not just within the same relationship, but from one relationship to the next. An anxious person who doesn't confront their fear of abandonment will keep seeking partners who reinforce that fear, chasing validation in people who can't give it consistently. An avoidant person who doesn't explore their fear of intimacy will continue gravitating toward partners who demand more than they can offer, confirming their belief that closeness always leads to conflict or loss of self. Even when love is present, it's not enough to override these deep-rooted patterns. Without intentional work on communication, boundaries, emotional regulation, and healing past wounds, the relationship will stay stuck in survival mode. Each person operating from defense, not connection. Each one interpreting the other's behavior through a lens of threat rather than understanding. And the saddest part is, both people often walk away from the relationship feeling like they failed. The anxious partner believes they were too much, that they drove the other away. The avoidant partner believes the relationship was just too demanding, too dramatic, too intense to maintain. But failure in these relationships doesn't usually come from a lack of care. It comes from a lack of understanding, a lack of tools, a lack of inner work. Both partners may truly want the relationship to succeed. They may see the potential, feel the bond, imagine a future. But want isn't enough. If nothing changes, the cycle just repeats. Maybe not immediately. Maybe there's a good week, a heartfelt conversation, a spark of hope. But the underlying fears are still there, silently guiding every word, every silence, every reaction. And without confronting those fears, both people end up reliving the same pain over and over again, just dressed in different moments. The anxious partner seeks reassurance while the avoidant seeks space, and this single dynamic becomes the root of countless misunderstandings and emotional conflicts. It's not just a difference in preferences, it's a fundamental clash in how each person experiences safety and love. For the anxious partner, closeness equals security. When they feel emotionally connected and affirmed, they feel calm. Their nervous system can relax because their greatest fear, abandonment, is being soothed. They thrive on quality time, clear communication, physical affection, and consistent affirmation. The moment those things are threatened or become inconsistent, their inner alarm system goes off. Doubts flood in, and they become hyper-aware of any emotional distance. A delayed text, a colder tone, a missed call, these aren't small things. They're interpreted as signs of something deeper going wrong. For the avoidant partner, it's almost the opposite. Emotional closeness can feel overwhelming, sometimes even suffocating. They equate space with safety. When things get too intense or emotionally heavy, it triggers a need to retreat, to create distance. It's not always a conscious decision. It can feel like an instinctive need to protect their independence, to keep control over their internal emotional environment. While they may care deeply for their partner, the expression of that care doesn't come through constant closeness. In fact, too much proximity can cause them to shut down emotionally, to feel trapped or exposed in ways that feel unsafe. So when one person is reaching out for more connection and the other is pulling away to preserve their emotional stability, a vicious cycle forms. The anxious partner senses the withdrawal and begins to panic. They might start texting more, seeking verbal confirmation of love, asking questions like, "Are you okay?" Or "Do you still want to be with me?" They may not realize it, but these are not just questions, they're emotional lifelines, they're efforts to feel secure again. But to the avoidant partner, this behavior can feel like pressure. It can feel like they're being asked to give more than they're ready to, so they withdraw even further. They might become emotionally distant, vague in their communication, or avoid contact altogether. They're not trying to hurt the other person, they're trying to regulate their own emotions. But from the anxious partner's perspective, this withdrawal feels like confirmation of their worst fears. So they try harder. They seek more reassurance. They analyze every interaction. They replay conversations in their head, searching for where it went wrong. This cycle can play out dozens, even hundreds of times in a relationship. And every time it does, both people leave the interaction feeling more misunderstood, more hurt, and more disconnected. The anxious partner starts to feel like they're begging for love. The avoidant partner starts to feel like nothing they do is ever enough. It's exhausting for both sides. And what makes it so painful is that both partners are reacting from their core fears. The anxious partner fears being left. The avoidant fears being overwhelmed. Neither person wants to feel unsafe, but their behaviors to protect themselves are exactly what trigger the other person's fear. This dynamic doesn't just affect how people argue or communicate, it impacts every aspect of the relationship. Planning a trip, discussing future goals, managing conflict, or even making small day-to-day decisions can become emotional battlegrounds. The anxious partner wants to feel included and prioritized, while the avoidant wants to feel free and unpressured. Even the language they use can differ. The anxious person might use words like us, we, and together more frequently, while the avoidant might gravitate toward words like I, me, and mine. These subtle cues reinforce the distance and deepen the emotional divide. And yet both people are trying to connect. That's the tragedy of this pairing. Beneath the anxious person's pursuit is a deep desire to feel safe in love. Beneath the avoidance distance is a deep fear that love will cost them their sense of self. Both are trying to protect their hearts, just in opposite ways. Without understanding this fundamental truth, it's easy to fall into blame. The anxious partner may label the avoidant as cold or indifferent. The avoidant partner may see the anxious one as needy or overbearing. But these labels only add to the pain and make real connection harder to reach. This emotional tug-of-war often builds to a breaking point. The anxious partner may become resentful and exhausted from constantly chasing emotional availability. The avoidant partner may feel drained and frustrated by the pressure to meet emotional demands that feel foreign or overwhelming. And as this tension builds, it becomes harder and harder to have honest, vulnerable conversations without triggering another spiral. Every attempt to bridge the gap ends up feeling like another round of misfiring intentions and unmet needs. What both partners long for, connection, safety, peace, feels increasingly out of reach, not because they don't care, but because the way they seek love unknowingly pushes each other further away. Transformation is possible, but only if both partners are committed to healing and meeting in the middle. For many couples caught in the anxious-avoidant trap, the idea of lasting change can feel like a distant hope. There's often a sense of resignation that this is just how they are, one person always needing more, the other constantly needing space. But attachment styles aren't fixed destinies. They're patterns, not prisons. And while they might be deeply rooted in past experiences, they can be reshaped with awareness, effort, and most importantly, mutual willingness to grow. The anxious partner needs to take responsibility for understanding where their fear of abandonment comes from. It's easy to place the blame entirely on the avoidant partner's emotional distance, but healing begins with ownership. That means recognizing that not every moment of silence is rejection, not every need for space is a sign of falling out of love. It means learning to self-soothe, to regulate emotions without relying solely on the other person for validation, and to build an internal sense of worth that doesn't collapse the moment someone pulls away. It doesn't mean suppressing needs or pretending to be okay with distance when they're not. It means learning how to express needs in ways that are grounded, respectful, and non-reactive. It's the shift from chasing love to standing firmly in one's value and allowing closeness to be built through healthy communication rather than fear-driven pursuit. At the same time, the avoidant partner must also be willing to confront the emotional walls they've built. Avoidants often learned, consciously or unconsciously, that vulnerability leads to pain, that love comes with expectations they don't know how to meet, or that being emotionally open makes them weak or dependent. But transformation for them begins when they stop seeing emotional needs as threats and start viewing them as invitations to connect, to show up, to let themselves be seen. That doesn't mean abandoning their need for independence. It means learning that independence and intimacy can coexist. That being emotionally available doesn't have to mean losing themselves or being controlled. It means recognizing that the impulse to pull away is not always protective. It can also be a barrier to the very connection they crave deep down. But none of this works if only one person is doing the work. That's often the mistake in these relationships. One partner dives into self-development, reads all the books, goes to therapy, starts learning how to manage their patterns, while the other stays stuck in defensiveness or denial. That imbalance quickly breeds resentment, because no matter how much one person grows, the relationship can't evolve unless both people are willing to stretch beyond their comfort zones. There has to be a shared commitment to creating a safe space for each other. And safety, in this context, doesn't mean the absence of conflict. It means the presence of honesty, respect, and emotional responsibility. Meeting in the middle means the anxious partner works on slowing down their reactivity, learning to pause before interpreting every action as a threat, and cultivating trust in themselves and the relationship. It means learning that love isn't something to chase or earn, it's something to experience and co-create. It also means respecting the avoidant partner's boundaries without viewing them as rejection, while still expressing their own needs with clarity and self-respect. For the avoidant partner, meeting in the middle means making space for emotional expression without shutting down. It means being willing to stay present during difficult conversations instead of withdrawing or becoming dismissive. It's about learning that emotional intimacy doesn't have to be overwhelming when it's handled with mutual care. That means leaning in when the instinct is to pull away, and being curious about their partner's feelings instead of feeling cornered by them. This process isn't quick, and it's not always linear. There will be setbacks, moments when old patterns show up again. But each time both partners choose growth over comfort, connection over avoidance, and understanding over reaction, they build a new foundation. A foundation where both people feel seen and safe. Not because they've changed who they are to fit each other, but because they've chosen to grow into better versions of themselves, individually and together. It's not about fixing each other. It's about becoming the kind of partners who no longer need to live out old survival patterns in the name of love. It's about building a relationship where closeness doesn't feel threatening and distance doesn't feel like abandonment. It's about transforming love from something reactive and fearful into something conscious, grounded, and lasting. Even if the relationship doesn't work out, the self-awareness it brings can change everything moving forward. Not every anxious-avoidant relationship is meant to last forever, but that doesn't mean it's a failure. In fact, these relationships often become powerful mirrors, reflecting back the hidden parts of ourselves we haven't fully acknowledged, let alone understood. When two people with opposing attachment styles come together, they trigger one another's most deeply buried fears and insecurities, not out of cruelty, but out of the emotional blueprint they carry into relationships. And in doing so, they offer each other one of the greatest opportunities for growth, if that opportunity is accepted. The anxious partner learns what it means to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. They begin to notice how often they reach for validation, not because their partner is inherently neglectful, but because they've associated love with constant reassurance. They start to question the stories they've told themselves. The ones that say if someone doesn't reply quickly, they don't care, or if they need space, they must be pulling away forever. And through this process, they begin to see their worth not as something to be earned through overgiving or constant availability, but as something inherent. They stop trying to convince someone to stay and instead begin choosing themselves. They build internal anchors, rituals, beliefs, practices that bring stability from within, so their emotional well-being isn't so easily rocked by the changing tides of another person's availability. At the same time, the avoidant partner begins to face what they've been running from. They start to recognize that their desire for space, while valid, often masks a deeper discomfort with emotional vulnerability. That the walls they've built to protect themselves are also keeping them from the kind of connection they secretly long for. They begin to confront the stories they've been carrying, that needing someone is weakness, or that being close will inevitably lead to disappointment or entrapment. And if they allow themselves to stay present long enough, to remain open instead of retreating, they may find that intimacy is not the threat they thought it was. That emotional connection doesn't have to cost them their independence, it can actually deepen it. Because true freedom isn't about running away from emotions, it's about having the strength to stay with them and communicate them honestly. Sometimes the lessons come through effort and mutual growth within the relationship. Other times they come after the breakup, when the dust settles and both people are left alone with the truth of their patterns. The anxious partner may look back and realize how much they abandoned themselves while trying to hold on to someone who was never emotionally available. The avoidant partner may look back and feel the weight of the opportunities they missed for deeper connection, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to stay. And in that reflection, both people can begin to do the real work, not to fix the relationship, but to understand themselves on a deeper level than they ever have before.